Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Steelers Draft Talk. I'm your host, Derek Bell. With me is my good buddy, Nick Martin. Today, we got a pretty cool episode. We're going to go over some of our favorite potential fits for the NFL draft process. Not just, highly ranked guys, but other players as well, where we'd like to see them land, team fits, schematic fits, things of that nature. So, really looking forward to getting into this. Nick and I created a list of 5 players each that we kind of think are interesting fits with certain teams, certain coaches. And then we're also going to give one player for the Steelers as well each. So first off, how we doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. It's all about the tape grind right now, but man, got to enjoy a pretty good Super Bowl overall. A little bit of an anticlimactic ending. It was it lived up, honestly, like up till that point. Like both quarterbacks played out of their minds. Both offensive lines showed why they're the best in football, and to me, that showed the importance of why offensive line is king in terms of getting to the Super Bowl. And
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I don't think you can dismiss the fact that, the 2 best offensive lines in the league ended up, on that stage. And granted, the field was definitely terrible and aided some of that stuff too. But I thought that both offensive line, I thought both those offensive lines played fantastic. Got great quarterback play. It was literally everything you could have possibly wanted, with the exception of a better finish. We're not going to get into the controversial call, or controversial to some call, at the end of the game. But, it was weird waking up on Monday, because I feel like, all of NFL Twitter and all of the rest of, NFL fans are now in the same mode we've been in for, a while now, which is draft mode. So it's going to be interesting. These next couple months are going to be wild. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into some of these best fits. We're going to start off with your selection for the Steelers. I'm going to give my Steelers selection at the end of the pod. I'm really excited about that. I think I'm going to get some interesting comments from the YouTube chat when this drops. So, but without further ado, give me your favorite fit for the Steelers.
Yeah. So for me, we've talked so much on this podcast about how tape is king, film is king, and we've gone over many times about how Asante Samuel Jr. should not have fallen as far as he did, and people, he had connections with the Steelers for a long time. It was a lot of the debate, like in that draft, was it going to be him, or was it going to be Najee Harris at the time? Right now, I look at where the Steelers are sitting at 32 and 49, and they have a chance to be able to rectify the mistake of of passing on Asante Samuel Jr. and taking a guy like Clark Phillips III with one of those 2 picks. Clark Phillips III, he has a high range of where he could and couldn't go. Plays a lot on the outside, has good amount of slots on good amount of snaps in the slot. Thing with me that stands out, he's got good athleticism overall. He's incredibly feisty at the catch point. That's what you want to see. That's one of the things that defined Asante Samuel Jr. But the thing I notice is his technique, especially in catch, particularly this year. His ability to to not allow his face to get crossed up. He had really good reps against Oregon playing catch technique, getting his hand in there. Play against Jordan Addison in the Pac-12 title game where he was able to break up that pass intended for him. He had really competitive reps against some of the best receivers you'll ever see, like even Marvin Harrison Jr. as the prior year, some of Jackson
Rose
Smith
Bowl.
and Rose Bowl, Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. You also got tape against Drake London that year as well. Showed very competitive reps. Wasn't always perfect, but you see a lot of the traits that are very appealing. Then you have tape against Jordan Addison. And one of the big differences, I think, between a lot of corners in this draft versus Clark Phillips is they don't have a lot of experience versus the best receivers in the country. Clark Phillips does. He's athletic. He has good technique. He's feisty. He tackles extremely well. That's important. And he has versatility inside and out. The fact he can play both, the fact that he's instinctive in zone, knows how to bait, can play well from an off-man coverage perspective, and absolutely click and close, drive on those outbreakers. Those are the traits that you want to see in a corner like that. And while he might not have the length that people are looking for, I think that inside-outside versatility is so important, especially when you don't have that length. But film, tape is king. Look at Trent McDuffie. Look at Asante Samuel Jr. Take the best corners film, because film is king. That's just what I gotta keep preaching to talk about Clark Phillips III, because there's gonna be guys that get talked up ahead of him, like Emmanuel Forbes, who have some respectable film, but might just be longer, taller guys with better ball production. You just have to drown out some of the noise and just go with the best player. And that's kind of what I'm thinking with Clark Phillips.
Yeah, I mean, Phillips is a guy that obviously I've talked a lot about on Twitter. We talked a lot about him on the podcast too, but he's just a playmaker, man. Like, you pop up on, any Utah game, it seemed like I was turning on just live broadcast. You don't get to see a lot of the cornerback play, but it just seemed like he was showing up week to week. And then you look at the film. I mean, I use this phrase all the time, but the film's the film. I mean, we can go over, the measurable aspect of it, him only being 5'10", 180. But I mean, the film's the film. And, he was extremely competitive. You talked about all the matchups that he's been, put in. I think he can play man coverage. He can play zone coverage. I loved how twitched up this dude is. The way that he can click and close, the way that he changes direction, extremely light, like typewriter type feet. And like that I've seen this comp thrown out there on Twitter, like Denzel Ward. Like, I don't want to go that far, because I think Ward was in a different tier in terms of a prospect for me. But like, when I look at just some of the things that they can do in terms of just movement skills, I think that there are some similarities there. So yeah, I mean, Phillips is a guy that I think, isn't going to go as high as probably his film says that he should, but whoever is going to get him, I mean, is going to get a baller. And I even think too, which will lead me to a point I'm going to make later in the podcast, but slot corner, even if Phillips can't survive on the boundary, and this is some of the points that I made it regarding Asante Samuel Jr. too, even if he can't survive out there, a slot corner is your starter. Like, you're still going to get a really good player in the slot. And Phillips has tape. I mean, we're not talking about a huge projection in there. Most of his time has come outside, but he's got plenty of tape in the slot. So, like, it's not a full projection where you don't know how he's going to fare in there. Like, he has all the skills necessary. You mentioned how feisty he is, how tough he is. He's a willing tackler. So, like, he's going to be able to survive inside, even if, he kind of gets pushed out there or pushed inside there. So, let's get to my first pick. My first pick actually involves someone that played in the Super Bowl that we just talked about, which is the Philadelphia Eagles. So my favorite fit here for the Eagles is Bijan Robinson. It's too easy in my opinion, but it just makes so much sense. They got 2 first-round picks at their disposal right now. I think they have like pick 10, pick 30. I know that Philly doesn't typically take running backs early. If I remember correctly, like Howie Roseman's like never done it. But I just love to see them get Robinson, man. Like, think about how dominant that offensive line is, how good they are up front. You got Jalen Hurts, who's a wrecking ball in the quarterback run game. And then you add in the most dynamic tailback that we've probably seen since Saquon Barkley. I mean, I'm not normally a fan of taking running backs round 1, but unless you are an absolute special runner while also providing like really good value in the passing game, Robinson can do that. Like, you look at him as a running back, he forced 104 missed tackles last season, according to Pro Football Focus.
Absurd.
That was 21 more than anyone else in the country. I mean, we're not even talking about the same realm as the other backs in this class. And then, the reason for that, he's got rare contact balance, extremely good athlete, the ability to string moves together seamlessly. The way that he operates in tight spaces, the creativity as a runner is special. And I love watching him play. And then even as a receiver, like, not only do I think he has soft hands, he can be, a reliable check down option. He can run the running back route tree. I have seen Texas put this dude in the slot and run a post route over the middle of the field.
And he'll come out with the catch.
Yes, it is different. we as a football community sometimes use this phrase about certain backs where we're like, he could operate as a receiver. Like, very few times do I actually agree with that when people use that phrase. Bijan Robinson could legitimately play in the slot. I really fully believe that. I think if you gave him like enough practice time and in the right scheme and you used him to his skill set, like he could legitimately be a plus player for you in there. And I'm not saying that, Miles Sanders, who's a free agent, and Quez Watkins, their current slot receiver, they're not bad players. Miles Sanders just came off a career year, but they're not Bijan Robinson level special. And that's why I just think I look at what Philly already has. Which is a really, really dynamic offense. They're rolling over there, but adding Robinson to the mix would just be unbelievable. You think about how you have to attack Philly. You are in a little bit of a quandary. You can't load the box because Jalen Hurts is still a really talented deep ball thrower, and you've got two ball winners on the outside with Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. He'll just throw over your head all day. And then if you don't put 7-8 guys in the box, how the heck are you going to stop Hurts and Robinson in the run game? I think that it would give them so much flexibility up front and to where it would basically make them unstoppable as long as that offensive line continues to stay healthy. And I like I said, I don't know that they're going to be willing to do that. But the Philly's just a team where I look at Bijan and say, like, this could take the top off. This could take them to a whole different level. So
I can definitely see that. I mean, we talk about Bijan Robinson as a talent in terms of just his ability east to west and just being able to string cuts together. Obviously, his vision is really improved, especially this year. I think he presses the line of scrimmage a lot better than he did the prior year.
Little less bouncing.
Yeah. Like, that's one of the differences I noticed between him and Barkley. I think Barkley was a lot more prone to bouncing. And then this year with Bijan, I thought he was a lot more decisive as a runner. And I think that was more important. That's one of the important developments you wanted to see with him. Receiver-wise, he has great catch technique. I talk about this a lot. There's difference between having your hands wide and like clapping on the ball, similar to how Chase Claypool did back with the Steelers. But big thing with Bijan, keeps his hands high and tight, doesn't allow the ball to rattle around. He makes those catches look seamless. I think that's a big reason why you'd advocate for a running back like that, especially because they have the offensive line framework in place. The big problem with taking a running back early is if you don't have that infrastructure, it completely defeats the purpose, especially early on. Like, if you're picking that high, you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I think Philly too, like having 2 first-round picks and the best roster in football, like, yes, running back in round 1 is a luxury, but if there's any team that could ever in the history of football afford that luxury, it's probably Philly's roster right now. I know they got some free agents, but I even look at some of the free agents that they got, like Kaiser White, guys like that, but like they've drafted their replacements. They have guys in place. They drafted Nakobe Dean last year. He didn't even play because they had other guys already like in the picture. So I think that they've got answers to a lot of their potential questions this offseason. And, they got the ammo to make a move like this. And, Jalen they're in the Super Bowl window. Philly's going to be extremely competitive. We watched him go toe for toe, tat for tat with Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. And I think that answered a lot of questions. There should be no one still wondering if like Jalen can be a very productive starter, like we were wondering maybe in the offseason.
Different conversation there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
like it's, this is going to go a little bit in, but I'm going to also go. I also picked Philly. I have a guy in mind for them, and I've seen him mocked quite a bit there. I have gotten to his film quite a bit. I've watched him live enough to at least have an opinion on his skill set. I haven't quite finalized an evaluation, but Pittsburgh defensive tackle Kalijah Kancey makes so much sense for them, with Javon Hargrave being a free agent. They need that 3 technique to be able to rush the passer, and Kancey can do that. And the biggest difference between him and Ed Oliver as an evaluation perspective, Oliver was a guy who won with speed and quickness and power. His pass rush plan was very simplified coming out. He won with a lot of effort, and there was a lot of things that you had to project at the next level. It's not quite come together for him. So it's been a bit of a rough development cycle for him. He's shown some potential in that regard. But I think Kancey, if you're asking him to just be a pure pass rusher, he's way more complete in that regard. There's a variety of moves when it comes to cross chop, rip combo, swim, rip, bull rush, into push pull. There's a really great variety that you see with Kancey, and it all starts with his first step quickness. He is explosive off the line of scrimmage. Just being able to beat guys, not just with quickness, but with hand placement, that's important as a 3 technique. And if they can't get Kancey, another guy I'm just gonna throw out there, Adetomiwa Adebawore from Northwestern, the guy who kind of played edge rusher and 3 technique for Northwestern. In my opinion, he projects way better as a 3 technique. He has way better film at times when he's playing 3 technique. He showed it down in Mobile, and he has dominant levers. Like, unlike Kancey, I think Kancey actually has an underrated wingspan. I think Adebawore has a ridiculous wingspan for how short he is. The fact you can have 34-inch arm length and be 6'1", you have that leverage advantage, and you can beat guys with that length, that one-arm stab, and you can really see his power potential, along with just his quickness off the line of scrimmage. Like, he showed a lot of great quick wins. Those are the 2 guys that I'm expecting Philly to be linked with heavily, because I do not believe they're going to be able to bring Javon Hargrave back, and they need that type of pass rusher, in my honest opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Kancey's very interesting. He's going to be a bit of a unicorn and outlier for the position, right? I mean, their opinions on him are going to be all over the place, not just in the draft community, but in the NFL as well. 6 foot, 280, I think is what he's listed at.
Yes.
But I just look at the flexibility and the burst that he offers, the ability to get out the line of scrimmage, plays with incredible urgency. And I just think, too, that natural leverage that he plays with is key. I mean, there's pros to being only 6 foot tall when everybody you're going up against, inside and along the interior is like 6'3", 6'4". So there's pros there with his ability to get under blockers' pads. You mentioned the myriad of different, pass rushing moves that Kancey has. He's been one of the most productive pass rushers in the country, regardless of position.
22.7 pass rush win rate. That's the highest out of any interior defensive lineman for this year's draft, including Jalen Carter.
I mean, you can't look at his film and not come away with it, like, be impressed at least as a situational pass rusher. Like, I do not see. The range of outcomes might be more vast than other interior prospects in the class, but I also think, like, there is a clear path for him being a productive player. And, we see guys that necessarily, not saying, I think the round 1 talk for Kancey might be a little bit of a stretch for me personally, but I do think on day 2, even if he's never a 70 or 65% snap guy, like, I do think that he could still be a truly impactful player, because you're going to have to stop the pass. Every team's looking for pass rushers, and, that's really no secret, and Kancey does that, as good or better as anybody else in this class, in my opinion. My next pick is involving probably one of the more, I guess, disappointing teams over the past season, and that's the Chargers. I would like to see the Chargers end up with Jalen Hyatt, and Chargers have already kind of checked one of the boxes this offseason, and letting Joe Lombardi go, bringing in Kellen Moore, which I personally think is an upgrade. I mean, I don't know how other people feel about that, but I think that's a pretty drastic upgrade.
It's an upgrade.
Yeah. We already know they have a quarterback with superstar talent, unlimited potential. He's only got 1 year left on his rookie deal, but, Justin Herbert's going to be there for a long time. And I think that they really need to maximize that window the best that they can. And when I watch the Chargers, it's brutal, the amount of stick concepts that they run and the amount of underneath throws that Herbert, is forced to take, sometimes because of scheme, sometimes because he just doesn't feel like he has the weapons to push the ball down the field as much. But I just see a serious lack of speed in their playmakers.
Yes.
Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, neither one of those guys really, threaten you with speed. Jalen Hyatt runs like a gazelle, and there's no one else faster in this class on a vertical plane than this guy. So he was a little bit of obviously a 1 year wonder this past season at Tennessee, but 1,200 plus yards, 15 touchdowns. Hyatt led the country in touchdowns on throws that traveled 20 plus yards in the air with 8. The Vols offense obviously is a little bit funky of a projection. You know, the splits are kind of weird. They gave Hyatt some switch releases and, you know, freed him up against press coverage. So there's not really a ton of film there. But this is a dude that legitimately runs 4.3, like not just 4.3 track speed, but it looks the part on film. You've heard the expression, you know, if he's even, he's leaving. His ability to consistently blow past people is pretty remarkable. And, you know, Tennessee played him a lot in the slot where he was able to get some matchups on, you know, safeties. And you see that too high movement in the NFL too. Like the amount of schemed up opportunities you can give him, you know, trying to get him up, matched up on safeties, even at the NFL level, there's not going to be anyone that can run with him. And I think when you look at Herbert and that rocket arm that he has, let's throw the ball down the field.
Exactly.
Like, let's try to, you know, go over the top. And Herbert's never played with a guy this fast or this talented, just in terms of, you know, working vertically. So I don't know what happens with Keenan Allen. There's some talk that he could potentially be a cap casualty there. But, you know, Hyatt has played a lot in the slot, so there is a different archetype, but, you know, you could feel a need there too. But he just reminds me so much of Will Fuller, you know, with his build. And I know that Fuller was a little bit of a polarizing prospect when he came out of Notre Dame, but they have similar frames, you know, tall, kind of skinny guys that, you know, are obviously extremely fast. Hyatt is a little bit of a projection. I'm not going to lie. I know opinions on him are going to be all over the place. And I'm not sure that, you know, when you look at maybe the film, you see as complete of a prospect as you'd like for a guy that you're probably going to have to take first round or top 50 at least. But the two things I think Hyatt does extremely well, like he has unbelievable speed that you cannot teach and you're just not going to be able to get elsewhere. And, you know, I do think that there is maybe a little bit more room for development here in this regard, but I do think he has pretty good ball skills. I think he tracks the ball very well. I like some of the things that he's able to do, like catching the ball over his shoulder. Not a ton of contested catches. Again, that's a little bit of a projection, but I just think when you look at needs for the Chargers offense, you know, he fills their biggest need, in my opinion, which is a lack of playmaking down the field and just speed in general.
Yeah, you mentioned that speed. That's honestly the biggest problem with the Chargers right now. They don't have anyone kind of taking the top off to open everything else underneath. And when you don't have that, it creates a lot of tight window throws. It creates a lot of need to be on time in the quick game. And Herbert had to be almost surgical in that regard. Hyatt definitely makes a lot of sense because of that speed to take over the top. Most of my exposure to him is live. I have not gotten to his film just yet, but in the amounts that I've seen, he destroys cushion in just like absolute hurry.
Quickly.
Like his ability to just get vertical just so quickly, like he has that speed, that ability to beat you over the top. There was a play against Chris Smith where he just like he beats him by like 7 yards. Like he gets like 7 yards of separation on him, and like he doesn't end up making a play because the ball's overthrown somehow from Hendon Hooker. The thing with that's going to be a projection is the Tennessee scheme, is because there's a lot of wide splits. There's not a lot of true press coverage that he's facing. There's a lot of it's a lot less routes that he's going to end up running. So there's a huge projection in that regard. Have to see how he looks in a limited time, just in those reps, how he looks being able to flash beating those types of coverages.
And the way that Hyatt can get in and out of his breaks gives me hope that with time he could become a good route runner. Like, I preach this all the time with prospects, like don't knock guys for what they weren't asked to do. And that's very difficult because the film is very important and you can only go off of like what you see and traits. I think that Hyatt has the traits to become a better route runner. I just think that the scheme that he played in, they didn't really need him to do much. And why would you? Like, there was no one in the country that could keep up with this dude step for step. So,
South Carolina was terrified of him.
Yeah. I mean, like I just think that the way that he's going to transform the way that defenses are going to play you offensively. And because you cannot forget about where this dude is on the field, because it will literally be a 5-second, 70-yard touch, like 60-yard touchdown. It's what will happen. So I think that he's really intriguing, and I love the fit there with Herbert and that rocket arm.
Yeah.
I just think that, a lot of times when you watch his film, there's some blown coverages and some things like that, but the dude's just wide open. The amount of space and separation that he can get vertically, I mean, I'm pretty sure that I could go out there and at least throw one to him sometimes, because it's like, there's 10 yards of separation between him and the defensive back.
And as productive as he was,
it's different.
There was missed opportunities as well. And that's definitely something you got to keep in mind with Herbert's arm. He's going to hit that guy in stride, for sure. I'm going to go in a bit of a different direction. So I'm going to look at the Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West. And I look at their needs. They're going to have both their offensive tackles, Andrew Wiley and Orlando Brown, are going to be free agents. So obviously there's going to be some concern in that regard. I ended up going in a much different direction because I see how much 12 and 13 personnel the Chiefs like to run. And I see that Kancey, as dominant as he is, still, he's starting to get up there in age. What would be a better successor plan than to draft Dalton Kincaid from Utah? I have gotten through his film. I have done his evaluation. He is the best tight end in this class. I feel very confident in saying that. His ability as a receiver, as a route runner, is special. The way he can just manipulate leverage with such consistency versus zone man. He can win one-on-one. He can manipulate leverage to create those soft spots in zone. He can beat you. He can beat you vertically more than you'd expect. Horizontally, he separates with relative ease, and his ability after the catch, he strings moves together like it's nothing. The guy is so loose, quick twitched, and fluid that, like, as redundant as that sounds, he's able to go. He can either use his contact balance to go through you, or he can go around you. He's just one of those athletes that you don't really see in a tight end very often. And while I was kind of lukewarm at first on him when it came to his film when I was watching him live, when I got to the film recently, it was unbelievable the level of nuance he has with his routes to be able to win with his hands. It's so consistent at the breaking point. He knows how to vary his pace so well, to slow down his route or to just keep it on time and just break as quickly as possible. That's the thing that you love about players like this. I think Dalton Kincaid is not only special, I think he is the best receiving prospect of this class. And I feel that way with strong regard. The Kincaid as a blocker, I've seen some people say he is a liability as a blocker. I completely disagree. He is a lead blocker. He knows how to get himself involved. He plays with good physicality, keeps his hands on you. Biggest thing I want to see is he needs to stop overextending. He drops his head. He might stop his feet for a bit, and it causes him to lose against these longer levered edge rushers that can take advantage of him. I think he has the baseline as a blocker that I can work with. It's not functional strength that's a problem. It's technique. And you look at what he has as a baseline there, and you look at his baseline as a receiver, I think you have a special prospect. For me, Dennis Pitta was a guy I thought about because of how special and fluid he was in terms of his being a receiver, but that's just his floor, in my opinion. I think there's so much to work with Dalton Kincaid, and I just think the Chiefs would get so much out of him, especially early, because I think he can absolutely play with his level of nuance as a receiver. Like, honestly, in my opinion, I think this would just be like taking candy from a baby if the Chiefs get a chance to draft Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah, that's definitely what we need to make it easier on Mahomes is, as soon as a generational talent at tight end steps away, we give him, a unique, dynamic threat at the position to take over afterwards. And you mentioned this before we jumped on, but Kansas City, some of the things they even did against Philly, playing a lot more like heavy sets, some 12 and 13 personnel. I mean, see Noah Gray, add in Dalton Kincaid, you kind of create some matchups based on formational alignments. I think that's a really intriguing fit. You mentioned Kincaid, just the ability to not just create space with his body, but also like quickness in and out of his breaks. What he can do after the catch, extremely reliable hands. I always go back to this stat. I'm pretty sure that he only dropped like a couple passes his entire time in college. And you talk about productivity, man, like there wasn't really any dudes out there at his position as productive as he's been over the past couple of years. I mean, just some monster outings. So I'm a big Kincaid fan. I don't know if he'll end up being tight end one for me because I still have to finish, Michael Mayer. But, I've watched Darnell Washington. I do personally prefer Kincaid a little bit just because I think it's a little bit less of a projection, even if Washington may offer a higher floor, because I think that, he might have some untapped receiving potential to go along with being, a truly special blocker, at least for the position. But my next pick is going to be sort of Steelers related. Former Steelers assistant, now Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores, headed to Minnesota. Fit here is really interesting. Vikings played like the least amount of man coverage of anyone in the NFL. And if you know what Brian Flores is about, he wants to play man coverage. You look back at like what they've done in New England when he was there, but also like obviously what they did with Miami when he was the head coach. Minnesota just didn't have the personnel last year to play man coverage. I mean, that's pretty plain and simple. They drafted Andrew Booth and Lewis Seen last year, but neither one of them were healthy enough to get on the field. I think that they really have to strongly consider going and getting a cornerback early in this draft. Patrick Peterson's a free agent, kind of aging out, even though he had a decent season last year. Harrison Smith's kind of aging as well. So we really need to add some high upside youth to this back end. And I think that's why I'd like to see Cam Smith there. Even if those guys come back from injury, this year and kind of hit the ground running, I still think you need another piece. And I think Smith's a good fit. Has really quick feet. He could play off coverage from a pedal, really low in his stance. He's dynamic in his transitions. He can also play at the line of scrimmage. I think he's got really good hip fluidity to turn and run with guys. He has enough deep speed to keep up with most receivers. I also think he's just competitive as hell. And I really appreciate that in cornerbacks. I want guys that have that right type of mentality, really physical, really competitive. And that's really what he does. He plays with a chip on his shoulder at all times, a willing tackler. I think that, sometimes he can be a little bit over eager maybe, and doesn't break down always as in control as he needs to. But I love the mentality that he plays with. I think it is kind of similar in that regard to JC Horn, even if I don't see them as similar athletes. I think Smith's a good athlete. Horn was a special athlete for the position, but I trust Smith in man coverage. I trust him in zone coverage. I think he's got, really disciplined eyes. He can do different things for you at the position. I really think that this would be a good fit. And in order for Flores to really thrive in Minnesota, you got to give him corners. I mean, that's you look at where he's been. New England, they've had this, unique ability to draft and develop corners for the longest time. But, in Miami, he had Xavier Howard, Byron Jones. They even took another first-round corner that didn't pan out. But I think Flores, this is a good fit. And I do think the 23rd pick in the first round is probably around the range that Smith could begin to come off the board. And I think it's a good fit for their defense, and I think it makes a lot of sense from a prospect perspective too. This would be somewhere that he could go and they could get the most out of him.
For sure. Big thing with Cam Smith, I think he has way more inside-outside versatility than a guy like his size. Actually, because they ask him to travel a good bit, and I know you mentioned this before, but like he traveled with Jalen Hyatt. South Carolina asked him to travel Jalen Hyatt because they trusted him the most to be able to click and close underneath, while also being able to have the speed to recover versus a guy like that. Granted, they played him like 10, 15 yards off the line of scrimmage or something like that. And big thing with Cam Smith, he's like around 6 foot, but I think he's longer than he is tall. And I think you see a lot of that length really show up. Biggest thing for me, I love how aggressive as a tackler he is. He's one of those guys who tackles the catch extremely well, maybe a little bit more out of control at times, but I think there's something that you can teach in that regard. Biggest thing for me, I only have 3 games of film on him, and and most of it is 2021 with ECU and Vanderbilt, and the only 2022 game I watched was my mind is blanking, but regardless, I saw the ability to play off man really just extremely fluidly.
A lost start.
Typewriter feet. Absolute typewriter feet.
He got smooth footwork, man. I really enjoy watching corners play off man, just because, like I said, I think it's a little bit of a lost art in the league, and
especially from the tunnel.
I would really like to see maybe a little less grabbiness down the field. I still thought that he was a little bit grabby down the field at times, but some of that physicality, you don't want to coach that out of him either. Some of that aggressiveness. So you got to take with the good with the bad. But I think Smith's going to be a good player for a long time. I mean, I think that Flo could really get a lot out of him. So
I think he's someone that could be tied to Brian Flores or potentially the Steelers for sure. And in that regard, going to my next pick, I went with the Cardinals, who recently hired Jonathan Gannon, coordinator from the Philadelphia Eagles, and he got a lot out of Hassan Reddick. As he had 18.5 sacks as a pass rusher. So I had 2 different directions I could go. I could go with BJ Ojulari from LSU, who is a really athletic uber pass rusher in terms of just his ability to win with quickness and hands, maybe not as great against the run. I went with a little bit of a different direction with Nick Herbig from Wisconsin, who's in a similar mold, but I think he's much less talked about than his contemporary. And I think it's really interesting because he's only listed at like 6'2", 229. And you normally don't like seeing pass rushers listed around there. And his splits on the edge are limited in terms of pass rush opportunities, but in his pass rush opportunities, he had a 27.3 win rate the prior year in 2021, and this year he had a 23.9% win rate on the edge. And I think the biggest thing for me with Herbig is he runs the loop so consistent. He doesn't have to just win with hands in terms of like cross chop swims or just like rip moves. He can beat you with a ghost and just get under you and run that loop. Like the biggest thing with him is the speed and bend is something that is just a marvel with him. I haven't gotten fully to his evaluation, but in terms of what I've seen, I think his fit would make a lot of sense with what Jonathan Gannon likes to do with Hassan Reddick back in Philly, and he might want his version of that in Arizona, ironically, where Hassan Reddick mostly played off-ball linebacker until his final year. But Herbig would make a really good fit overall for the Cardinals, and Jonathan Gannon, I think he's a guy who could go around the 2nd, 3rd round range overall. Definitely a guy I think who's going to test extremely well in the agility and the 3-cone. Definitely someone to keep in mind.
Definitely flexible. I think the thing with Herbig is, you see that ankle flexibility you mentioned to run the hoop. And I think that that's something that's going to translate. I mean, the production for Herbig too, very good. I think he had 11 sacks last year, but he had quite a few the year before as well. Not necessarily a full-time player. His frame is definitely unique. Kind of, we talked about Kancey being a bit of an outlier. Herbig's kind of an outlier too. I think they have him listed like sub 230. You don't really see a lot of edge rushers. Usually like the bottom line threshold is usually about 240, 245. But you mentioned Reddick. That's a really interesting comparison to me because a lot of people, said that, Reddick couldn't play, edge full time. And then he goes and, gets the chance to do that in Carolina and Philly. Even if it's not, at 70, 80% snaps, he's still incredibly dynamic and productive. And I think that you could get some of the same stuff here. Herbig plays with his hair on fire. I've only watched one game of his, so I got to finish his eval too. But just there's a lot of traits to work with, and I'm not overly concerned with the frame as long as the value matches that. And I think sometime on day 2, I think he's going to come off the board, and depending on the fit, I think he could be incredibly productive, even if he's not a full-time player, at least over the first year or 2 of his career. So yeah. Let's go to my next one. I'm going to stick with the same position. I'm going to go with BJ Ojulari from LSU, and I want to see him with the Rams. So Rams don't have a first-round pick. Their season kind of fell apart last year, obviously going from Super Bowl champs to bottom of the barrel. They're giving up a huge capital selection here, the 6th overall pick to the Lions due to the Matt Stafford trade. Stafford weren't able to keep him healthy. Offensive line killed them last year, but some of that was due to injuries. Their free agent plan didn't work out either. They signed Allen Robinson. He kind of looks washed. And then they also lost Von Miller. And, Von, unfortunately, he was having another really good season for the Bills and got hurt. But I think that not being able to replace him and kind of give another compliment up front to Aaron Donald and Leonard Floyd really showed up on defense this past year. And that's why I got him taking Ojulari. Ojulari is one of my guys in this draft class. He was a captain at LSU. Really high character remarks from everybody that I've seen talk about him. Truthfully, one of the better speed rushers in this class. Just the ability to get off the football, win the edge, get tackles to turn their frame, kind of get out of balance. He can bend through contact on his way to the quarterback. Also think he's got a pretty diverse, pass rushing toolkit already. He'll use a 2-hand swipe, a ghost move. He has an inside spin counter. I think that there may be a little bit of untapped potential with some long arm usage. I don't know that he's as long as his brother was because his brother did this really well, but there was a couple different games where I felt like he was able to, have some success with that long arm. So the ability to set up his footwork or set up his pass rushing plan with his footwork, his tempo, his pace. I really appreciate that with Ojulari. And when you look at the Rams, they were, I think, 30th. I looked this up on Sports Info Solutions, but I think they were 30th last year in pass rush pressure rate. So that's not going to work. I mean, if they have any chance to, they get Sean McVay back, Aaron Donald's coming back, Jalen Ramsey's has some cryptic tweets. I don't know. But it seems like they are still very much trying to go all in on this thing. They're not going to hit the, self-destruct button and go into rebuild mode. So they're going to try to do this thing another year at least. So in the short term, Ojulari has a lot of potential as a pass rusher. And I think that he can do that year 1 because of how, well-versed and detailed he is already. Some definite concerns, I think, in terms of his run defense. He's going to have to get a little bit stronger at the point of attack in order to become a truthfully dynamic all-around player. But, you're looking for pass rushers. This is kind of the range in that 36th overall pick that I think he could potentially still be on the board. I don't have a problem with him going round 1. He's gonna grade like that, I think, for me, pending testing numbers. But, if he's here due to the edge class kind of being loaded, I think it's a great fit for the Rams.
Yeah, I think BJ Ojulari just offers a lot in terms of speed, size, or speed, flexibility, length overall. But the big thing with Ojulari, like you mentioned, is the run defense, which might end up having him fall a little further than expected. You never know with these types of guys because once they test out of the gym, they tend to kind of rise up. I remember Brian Burns was extremely divisive at the time. A lot of people really liked.
Not for me.
Yeah, no, he wasn't for me. But he was a little split in terms of how the NFL overall viewed him in terms of just how do you weigh his pass rush versus his run defense. And I think the big thing with Ojulari is you see a lot from a repertoire of pass rush moves that you can absolutely just go in on a guy like that. Because even if he can't be a full-time player as a rundown stopper, there's so much that you get out of a guy who can just rush the passer with extreme efficiency. And if you have to scheme around his deficiencies as a run defender, that so be it. The guy is fluid. He could probably handle dropping into coverage a little better than expected. He's got that fluidity, that that athleticism to be able to survive in space. Maybe might be a projection in that regard, but definitely something to keep in mind with him overall. I think there's a lot to work with Ojulari.
Yeah, I think Ojulari for me is somebody that I'm pounding the table for because I think that when you combine the character and then just the traits, the ability to bend, all that stuff is off the charts. And I'm betting on that all day long at edge rusher. And if you really want to see Ojulari at his best, there's a couple different tapes. But when I watched, this is the game that really sold me, was when they played Georgia last year.
Yeah.
There was a 3-play sequence where he was going up against Broderick Jones. Obviously, Broderick Jones going to be probably the second tackle off the board, depending on how you view Peter Skoronski. But there was a 3-play sequence where he went long arm, ghost move, 2-hand swipe, and beat Jones 3 straight plays. And he didn't get a sack, I don't think, on any of those plays, but he was consistently generating pressure. And after that, Todd Monken literally had to go away from some of their drop back passing game because I don't think that he believed that Jones could handle Ojulari one-on-one. And you started seeing them do a lot of orbit motions and, some play action stuff, some quick throws, some screens in order to kind of neutralize the effect that he was having on the game. So Ojulari is a guy that I absolutely love. I enjoy watching speed rushers. Brian Burns was one of my favorite prospects, probably ever. I don't quite think that he's I don't think he's Brian Burns, but there are some similarities. One thing with Ojulari too is he really needs to work on not having a false step off the line. He's incredibly explosive off the line of scrimmage, but he could be even more explosive if he would stop picking up his front foot it's not every time, but I would say at least half the time you see him kind of pick up his front foot, which kind of leads to a little bit of a delay. But there's a lot of traits. 21 years old, I think, too. So fairly, new on the runway. So.
Yep, for sure. And I'm going to get into my next player here. I'm going to go with a quarterback. We've looked at what the Colts have been trying to build. They recently hired Shane Steichen from the Eagles. I'm a huge Steichen fan in terms of his time with Justin Herbert. I thought Brandon Staley, when he came in and he cleaned the whole offensive staff, that was a really big mistake at the time, and it's kind of played out that way, unfortunately, for the Chargers. But he showed a lot of why he is, he can develop and help nurture a young talent, especially with what he did with Jalen Hurts past few years, in terms of just allowing him to grow and just taking advantage of his best traits. So for me, I really like Anthony Richardson to the Colts in terms of just harnessing that upside. Because to me, the thing with Anthony Richardson, I think he's way better in structure than he will get credit for in terms of being able to read things out. I think the biggest problem with him is his base can be very erratic. He heel clicks a good bit. He can sometimes get really narrow. Sometimes he's kind of wide and can cause, his accuracy to become a little bit scattershot in some regards. But I think his ability to throw from those off platforms, his ability to keep his eyes up in the face of the rush, that's the thing I'm a huge component of with Anthony Richardson, is his ability to navigate chaos within the pocket while keeping his eyes up, being able to throw. And you look at that division, and just within that conference, they have Trevor Lawrence there, who is an absolute freak for the position in terms of being able to not only run, but also just be able to, in terms of his arm strength, his ability as a passer. And we look at the rest of the conference, what are we looking at with these quarterbacks? Josh Allen, who's a freak, who's got that freakishly talented arm, just that ability. There's a lot of reasons why Anthony Richardson would make a lot of sense in terms of how the NFL is trending. It may take some time to iron out his mechanics. It took time for Lamar in that regard, but you can work with the baseline that he offers as a runner, while also understanding he has enough of a baseline as a quarterback to be able to read within structure. He can work his eyes much better than you'd think for a guy who's only played a season and a half or so of football. And that's the big thing to keep in mind with Anthony Richardson. The upside, the age, he's very young, both in football terms and his actual age. And that's a big thing that would go a long way for the Colts. Maybe they elect to go with a trade up for a guy like Bryce Young, who knows? But Richardson, if they want to go with the upside pull, I think that's the guy they should go with.
Yeah, hiring Shane Steichen is very interesting to me because Steichen's a guy who's worked with a lot of different quarterbacks. You think about, I'm pretty sure he worked with Rivers, he worked with Herbert, and then obviously he worked with Jalen Hurts. The Jalen Hurts thing, seeing his development last year or this past year gives me a lot more comfortability potentially landing Anthony Richardson in this spot. I think that Richardson is not, I agree that he's not as much of a project in terms of, mental capacity or structured play. I love the way that Richardson can navigate the pocket. There are several instances where you'll see him navigate the pocket, step up through pressure while also keeping his eyes down the field, which is huge. I mean, young quarterbacks are not very good at this. We talk about this all the time. Pocket presence wise, I think Richardson has that. He has a unique, innate ability to feel pressure. Something that I really like looking at in terms of quarterbacks in college is, when they're pressured, how often are they turning that pressure into sacks, or how often are they escaping pressure that leads to either throwaways or plays down the field? And I think Richardson does that as well as anybody in this class. I think that, when you watch the plays where people are in his face, he's able to, get around guys, move in the pocket. I don't like how often I see him with one hand on the football in the pocket. That bothers me.
Yeah.
And then the overall accuracy. I think he throws a beautiful deep ball. And I think the accuracy down the field, pretty good. I don't like how many times I'm seeing him skip passes to the running backs in the flat. That is something that's really going to – I don't know how Steichen's going to approach that. You look at Herbert and Rivers. Those two threw more to running backs than I think, other than Brady maybe in New England. Those two threw to running backs a ton. And Richardson has mechanical flaws with his base, footwork, lower body that just don't allow him to be very accurate underneath yet. But he's proven that he can develop quarterbacks and help them develop and reach their potential. And Richardson, in my opinion, has the highest ceiling in this draft class. I know that Levis probably got that label for most of the year, but when I watch these two guys, I'm taking Richardson's ceiling all day long. I think he's a better athlete. You watch that LSU game where he had that 80-yard touchdown run, which was absurd. I think there's a lot of potential there, and he's a fantastic, polarizing but fantastic prospect, and I'd love to see him end up in Indianapolis. So, all right. So let's get to my Steelers fit.
I love your pick too.
Yeah, this is so. Just a little spoiler for the fans of the pod. I'm dropping a mock draft either Monday or Friday, and this is going to be my first pick in the mock draft because it's going to be a what I would do to fix the Steelers mock draft because we haven't even had the combine. We haven't had pro days, visits, anything like that. So it's hard to predict who the Steelers are really going to like at this point in the process. But I'm going to go with Brian Branch from Alabama. Branch, to me, is currently one of the 3 to 5 best defensive players that I've watched in this draft class. I think that he is absolutely fantastic. And before I kind of get into why I like Branch so much as a player, I just think that it's important to understand what the Steelers want to do defensively. The Steelers want to play man coverage. They want to take the football away. But also I think that, just the NFL in general, they want to be able to play in nickel and dime. And they have had guys like Mike Hilton, Arthur Millette that have been extremely good playing downhill, playing the run, while also being kind of an extra linebacker in the slot. But the problem has been when those guys are forced to cover, especially on early downs where they can't get those guys off the field and kind of mask some of those athletic deficiencies or deficiencies in coverage. Branch, can do the things that Hilton and Mollett can do against the run and the screen game, playing behind the line of scrimmage, but he's also a really good cover guy. So I think you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. And he's a guy that you don't have to scheme around as much. You can literally weaponize him in the slot. Branch is the best tackler that I've seen in this class, regardless of position. Always so fast to the football, takes great angles, but also arrives extremely in control, breaks down, form tackler, has some stopping power to him. Backs don't drag him for extra yards after contact. Fantastic blitzer, not just from a timing perspective, but he'll blow up running backs in pass protection too when he feels like he's
functional strength.
And when he's not going to get there, maybe to the quarterback, he'll get his hands in the passing lanes to, bat down balls at the line of scrimmage or affect throwing angles. And then in coverage, plenty of man coverage experience, plenty of zone coverage experience. This is a guy who played as a starter on Alabama's defense, back in 2020 and hasn't lost that job. He plays that star position that Minkah Fitzpatrick, kind of made, I guess, famous for, the football landscape. But, essentially that slot position, especially in Saban's defense, is really difficult to play because you have to be involved in the run fit while also being a cover guy. Exactly. And Branch is just a guy that I think does it all, man. He does it all at a really high level. He's a good athlete. No character concerns. He's a very clean evaluation for me. I know exactly what I'm getting at the next level. And, you can argue positional value all you want, whether that's if you want to transform him into a safety. He doesn't have a lot of free safety experience, but I think he could do it. I know that he can play in the box as a strong safety. I know that he can play in the slot at the next level. He's the best safety in the class. I think he's a top 5 defensive player in the class. I don't know how the NFL is going to view him. Again, positional value is weird. Safeties and slot corners, they get paid weird in free agency. They're drafted weird. It's kind of unpredictable to predict where these guys are going to go. But Branch, to me, the talent is obvious. I think if you look at the Steelers, how they could use him, I think it could potentially transform their defense. And I'm a really strong believer in this dude's talent. I know for a fact that this dude's going to be a baller, and I would love to see him in Pittsburgh.
I think what's one of the most interesting things about Brian Branch is he plays the role that Minkah does, but I think he does what Minkah's role actually better in terms of what he can do in terms of wearing all the hats on the defense. His man coverage ability is a lot more polished than Minkah's was coming out. Minkah, for me, was just instinctually just different than a lot of players, and he was a physical freak in terms of his range and his ability. But Branch, blitzer, he's like Mike Hilton is a blitzer. He absolutely blows plays up in terms of just disruption. Like when teams pull their guards around and he takes on that pulling guard, he creates havoc in that backfield. He may not necessarily get credit for the play, but he creates a lot of disruption. He creates that moment so the guys can come in free and be able to make that play. And I think that's such a huge part of your defense. And then you have a guy like that who can play man coverage, play zone coverage extremely well, and wear those hats. I think that is something Pittsburgh's missing since Mike Hilton has been gone. Arthur Mollett can do those things as a blitzer, but he can't do the man coverage aspect of it all.
Yeah.
And I see why you would want to go with a guy like Brian Branch. I have not finalized my evaluation on him as of this moment, but in terms of the film I have seen, there is a lot of special traits in terms of just being able to wear all those hats on defense, and I can definitely see them wanting to go towards the Alabama pipeline if that guy is indeed available to them.
Yeah, I mean, just like I said, good athlete, he's tough as nails, absolutely offers a ton of versatility. I think he's incredibly instinctual and smart too. Has a very good understanding of down and distance, which is something that I pay a lot of attention to, especially for DBs. He understands route concepts. He understands what opposing offenses are trying to do. He's also came through clutch, in huge moments, man. I watch I think back to that Ole Miss game this past season, last play of the game, he's playing in the slot. They asked him to carry, I think it was the number 3 receiver vertical, like kind of up the pole, and they're playing, 2-man. He's in that trail technique. He's able to, flip his hips, understand his leverage, stay inside, get his head turned around, use that length to, deflect away the pass, as time expires and they come away with the win. And I think that this dude checks all the boxes. I already know I'm already prepared for the backlash I'm going to get for taking a safety / slot corner at, 17. Cause I haven't really, I don't pay a lot of attention, to mock drafts in general. It's really not my thing. I know fan bases love it. That's why, we do it for content, and I do enjoy putting them out. I just don't really, it's just not my thing.
Yeah.
But, I haven't really seen Branch mock the Pittsburgh very often. And like the stuff that fans, Steelers fans send me on Twitter that I see on my timeline. But I definitely think that, just from a talent perspective, this is a glove-like fit. And if you're not on board with the position, I just ask, I can hook you up with 2 or 3 games that will get you on board. Go watch that Kansas State game. Go watch the LSU game. Like, I can get you on board with like 2 simple games, man. I promise. So, don't roast me in the comments or anything like that. Just go watch Brian Branch. I promise I won't lead you astray. But all right, I think that pretty much does it for us. Ran a little long this week, but again, I speak for Nick as well. We really appreciate the support on the channel. Drop a like, drop a comment. If you like the episode, also if there's specific prospects that you want our feedback on, anything that any ideas y'all got for the next couple episodes, be sure to drop that in the comments, and we'll see you guys next week.
Peace.